All the way back in 2002, video game developers Terminal Reality gave us BloodRayne, an action-adventure take on a goth-punk vampire story. Following its success and that of its 2004 sequel, the BloodRayne franchise went on to become an instant classic, with its leading lady Rayne even becoming the first video game character to appear in men's entertainment magazine, Playboy. This was a big deal back in 2004. What followed were various comics and film adaptations, and while the series has been left dormant for quite some time, its lasting impact has left it one of the most suggested legacy franchises I've ever gotten to cover. Before we begin, let's get the obligatory what I will and won't be covering bit out of the way. Obviously, I'm going to include the first two games, as well as the 2011 side-scroller BloodRayne Betrayal, with a bit of an asterisk. I'm also going to go ahead and include all of the comics based on the franchise. While there's arguments either way on the canonicity of nearly every story told in them, each comic gives us a unique insight into Rayne and the world she lives in, so I think it's worth it to revisit each one of them. Their spots in the timeline aren't always exactly solidified, but I tried my very best to fit everything together in a way that makes the most sense. To be safe, take my placements with a grain or 200 of salt. As always, you can feel free to use the chapter markers to skip around to whatever you care about. However, as with every series I cover, there are some things I won't be covering. And really for BloodRayne, that's just the 2006 film adaptation and its two sequels. Not only because they're just adaptations and disconnected from the game's continuity, but because of two words: Uva Bowl. Also, while containing some references to, along with originally being intended to be a follow-up to, developer Terminal Reality's game Nocturne, as well as its own sequels, which take place within the Blair Witch universe strangely, due to licensing issues, BloodRayne ended up becoming its own franchise. So, I'll save the story of Nocturne for a video covering the Blair Witch games if there's enough interest. Let me know in the comments. One more note is that the 2011 side-scroller revival, BloodRayne Betrayal, contradicts several events in the main continuity. Because of this, I'm going to throw that story at the end of this video and treat it as its own universe or soft reboot type story. Now, without further ado, this is what you need to know about BloodRayne. Our story begins in the year 1920 in London, England, where we find the Brimstone Manor, home of the ancient Brimstone Society. The Brimstone Society has for years carried out a secret mission to hunt down and destroy supernatural threats to humanity. One night, the manor is forced to take a young boy suffering from lycanthropy, or werewolfism. His father, a fellow member studying the subject, pleads with the Lords of Brimstone to let him try to cure his son, but they carry him away before executing the boy. 12 years later, in Ireland, we find a young red-haired woman named Rayne, stalking the countryside. Rayne, the product of her human mother's unconsensual impregnation by a vampire father, is what's known as a dhampir, a being with all of the powers of a vampire, without most of the weaknesses. One night, Rayne kills a wolf outside of a farm before feeding on its blood. The farm's owner, Declan Finney, discovers the girl and surprisingly invites her in, simply thanking her for taking care of the pesky wolf. Inside his home, Finney not only recognizes that Rayne is a dhampir, but shockingly reveals that he was once one as well, until he somehow cured himself of his vampirism. Rayne asks him how he did it, and he reveals a mark on his arm, the insignia of the Brimstone Society. He fills her in on their story, imploring her to seek their help. Rayne then gives her own history, revealing that her father was a vampire named Kagan, who returned after her birth to murder her mother and the rest of her family as well. Ever since, Rayne has been on a vengeful warpath towards her father, stopping at nothing to find him and make him pay for his past actions. Declan then explains his past. He was a blacksmith's apprentice, but had no idea that his boss was also a member of the Brimstone Society. One day, their shop was attacked by demons. In the wake of the attack, the demons and the blacksmith vanished, leaving only a smoldering sulfur brimstone. Declan then used the magic within the stone to forge two twin blades, to hopefully give him the edge against the demons should they ever return. They did, over and over, leading to Declan joining an elite group within the Brimstone Society called the Triumvirate. They then led a war against the Vampire Nation, which was led by their king, known as Nefarious. Finney's story is then interrupted by one of his familiar demons finding him once again. A fierce battle then ensues, and Declan points Rayne to his treasured blades, instructing her to put them on. She follows his command, wielding the twin blades to assist in the fight. She drops one, and Declan picks it up before the pair fight side by side with one blade each. Unfortunately, the demon slices Declan's throat, causing him to drop the blade and fall to the ground. Rayne picks it up again and uses the twin blades to take the demon down once and for all. In the wake of the battle, Rayne finds Declan in his final moments, and finally introduces herself. After giving her new friend a proper burial, she takes his twin blades with her, promising to use them when she finally finds her father. The following year, in 1933, a pair of Brimstone Society members arrive in a vampire ghetto, under the cover of night, to watch a young half-vampire that they've had their eye on. None other than Rayne. After observing her using her twin blades to hunt down some vampires in search of her father, the duo from the Brimstone Society decide that they'll formally extend the invitation. Rayne then discovers it in the form of a necklace they left behind. She is then met by a member of the society, Lord Heinrich, an expert in demonology. He invites her into the society, but Rayne is initially skeptical. The meeting then goes very awry when Heinrich suddenly transforms into a monstrous creature, speaking of Beliar's skull. Rayne then fights the creature, which eventually emerges from Heinrich's body to reveal itself as some kind of demonic parasite, using him as a host. After she destroys it for good in a massive explosion, another pair of Brimstone Society members watch from afar, before deciding to open an internal affairs division within their organization. Sometime later, Rayne accepts their invitation and joins the Brimstone Society's ranks. For her first assignment, the newly coded Agent BloodRayne is put under the tutelage of a fellow dhampir named Mince, and the pair are sent to the recently quarantined town of Morton, Louisiana, to deal with a supernatural threat somehow turning its inhabitants into monsters known as mutates. Mince shows her new apprentice the ropes of slaying monsters Brimstone style, as well as a few new vampiric tricks along the way to the town. Hoping to find the source of the infection, Rayne and Mince investigate a church near a graveyard, where a biological mass carrying the condition was discovered. After Rayne is forced to defend the church from an onslaught of mutates, she and Mince discover a plaque commemorating the completion of the Great Wall of Fortitude surrounding the town, which Mince notes must have been due to the early French settlers fearing whatever roamed the swamps. Mince investigates the books in the church's library, while Rayne takes care of disposing the biological masses, which she soon discovers are actually nests for strange spider-like creatures. They meet a surviving gravedigger named Jean Sigmund, who reveals that the locals refer to these creatures as the Marizrek, a Creole term for swamp creature. Rayne proceeds to destroy all the nests in the area, guiding various survivors back to Mince at the mausoleum. One survivor, Kazi, blames the current ordeal on a voodoo priestess named Marasa, who hooked up with an old German man to conduct a ritual to awaken the Mother of the Underworld. When Rayne returns to the church, she finds Mince outside, distracted by a small frog. Suddenly, a large Marizrek monster attacks Mince by surprise, swallowing her whole. More Marizrek then attack the mausoleum, similarly devouring all of the survivors Rayne guided there. Now driven by vengeance, BloodRayne follows the Marizrek to their nest in the swamps, coming across the remains of the ritual Kazi mentioned. She is then met face to face with the massive Marizrek Queen, and a battle quickly ensues. Rayne is able to bring the Queen of the Underworld down, effectively bringing an end to the Marizrek menace. As she gazes upon her defeated foe, however, Rayne notices a glowing rib inside. She grabs it, but it suddenly begins to move on its own, forcing Rayne to stab herself in the abdomen with the broken rib. She collapses to the ground in pain, and the old German man Kazi mentioned, a member of the Nazi party named Jürgen Wolf, then arrives. While Wolf notes that he's only there to retrieve what he's looking for, he also takes great pleasure in pulling the rib out of Rayne's body, causing her immense pain that causes her to pass out. Wolf then vanishes in the aftermath, and Rayne is recovered by the Brimstone Society. Over the next 4 years, Agent BloodRayne continues conducting missions for the Brimstone Society, and her skills and blood rage continuously impress them. They soon send Rayne on another mission with a surviving Mince as her mentor, this time in Lhasa, Tibet. There, the pair hide among the monks during a reconnaissance mission, but the inexperienced Rayne quickly gives up their position. They're soon attacked by vampiric creatures inside of a temple, and Mince is forced to give her apprentice a quick lesson in fighting large numbers of enemies. Unfortunately, the numbers grow a bit too overwhelming, and Mince teaches her another lesson. Sometimes you have to know when you're outnumbered. The pair then make a mad dash out of the temple and escape out into the surrounding area. As they regroup overnight, Mince reveals that she's a Buddhist, and expresses her belief in reincarnation, noting that in a future life, perhaps Rayne might be the master, while she becomes the apprentice. Mince then reveals that the Tibetan-born vampires they came across have infiltrated the Dalai Lama's inner circle, and plan to install one of their own in his place. However, as is tradition, the new Lama must be a child, meaning the pair of Brimstone agents are currently hunting down a vampire child. The pair then infiltrate the vampire cult's village, finding imprisoned humans whom the vampires have been slowly replacing, while using said prisoners as their food. They release them, and Mince gives them weapons to defend themselves. While the imprisoned monks refuse to sway from their path of enlightenment by resorting to violence, Mince convinces them that defending their way of life is far more important than monsters. As Rayne leads the prisoners in revolting against the vampires, Mince pulls out a flamethrower to burn their nest from the inside. As she does, however, the vampire child finds her and immediately attacks, slashing and biting her throat. Rayne arrives and saves her, killing the would-be vampire llama in the process. The pair then exit with the prisoners, while Mince ignites the entire village behind them, ensuring that the vampire cult is eradicated. Later that night, Rayne and Mince stare up at the stars and discuss philosophy once again. Mince decides that fate brought them together for a reason, and that their friendship will be eternal. She ends their conversation by stating that if she ever dies, she'll do her best to return to her friend so they can continue their work together. And if Rayne were to die, she'd do the same. Sometime later, after taking down a particularly formidable foe, Brimstone agents inform Rayne of her next assignment, tracking down a vampire king in Frankfurt that the Nazis are secretly planning to transport to the United States. While she's initially dismissive of the idea, her interest is piqued when she learns that the vampire might, in fact, be her half-brother. Agent BloodRayne then travels to the Frankfurt airfield and sneaks in undercover to catch a ride aboard the airship covertly carrying the Vampire King, the LZ-129 Hindenburg. Unbeknownst to her, however, beneath the passenger's deck, the Vampire King, Dmitri, has already been awakened, and after the Nazis load a series of caskets filled with his vampire knights, he immediately turns on them and eliminates them, stating that he was cautioned to make sure there are no loose ends. He then proceeds to awaken his second-in-command, Seraph, to take care of a new situation. Meanwhile, the airship takes off, and once in air, Rayne celebrates the successful launch with Baron Franz von Schmidt and his family. When she retires to her cabin for the night, however, she finds Seraph waiting for her. Even worse, he's taken one of her blades. Rayne tries to fight off her attacker, but he's able to get the upper hand and knock her out, before reporting his work to his master, Dmitri. The Vampire King instructs Seraph to keep watch while he returns to his casket to rest. While Seraph just wants to take out the Nazis, Dmitri insists that they lay low and continue to use them to create a new home for vampires out of the United States of America. Rayne, meanwhile, breaks free of her captivity and retrieves her other blade. Seraph decides to take matters into his own hands and unleashes all of the sleeping vampires, save for Dmitri. The now awakened and very hungry vampires proceed to attack their Nazi handlers. Rayne arrives just in time to join in on the bloodshed, using her remaining blade to fight Seraph, still equipped with her other. During their scuffle, Seraph bumps into Dmitri's coffin, awakening his master. Predictably, Dmitri isn't very happy with his right-hand man's betrayal, and he swiftly punishes it with an immediate death. Rayne and Dimitri then face each other for the first time, immediately recognizing their family resemblance. Their ensuing fight soon causes the aircraft to burst into flame mid-air. Baron von Schmidt then arrives, distracting Dimitri. While the Vampire King proceeds to kill the Baron, the distraction causes him to turn his back on the lady. As the Baron points out Dimitri's lack of manners, Rayne decapitates her half-brother, bringing an end to his reign. Baron Franz von Schmidt then dies in Rayne's arms, as he marvels at the Hindenburg, noting that she was carried in the arms of angels. In 1938, the Brimstone Society learns that the Nazis are again studying the supernatural, this time closing in on a lost, powerful relic in South America. Agent BloodRayne is sent to investigate, and during her briefing, she's warned about the Gegengeist Group, or GGG, a Nazi task force dealing in the occult led and founded by Jürgen Wolf, the same old German Rayne ran into 5 years prior. BloodRayne is then given a list of targets to eliminate, including Wolf, in order to prevent their supernatural ambitions. Arriving on the coast of Argentina, Rayne infiltrates the GGG stronghold and immediately gets to work taking out the targets, starting with colonels and officers. On her warpath, Rayne comes across a Thule high priest named Von Blut, who fills her in on the relic the Nazis are searching for. As it turns out, in an attempt to recreate Atlantis, a lost kingdom of a superior, pure race, they've been attempting to resurrect its lost leader, Beliar, whose immortal form was split into pieces and scattered across the earth. The piece they've located in South America is Beliar's skull, and they're close to unburying it. Rayne disposes of the priest, who happens to be one of her targets, and retrieves some occult writings about Atlantis and Beliar on his person. She finds the Nazis' communications center and transmits the information back to the Brimstone Society, who then task her with retrieving the relic before their enemies can. She retrieves some explosives from an armory nearby and uses them to destroy the communication equipment behind her so it can't be used to call reinforcements. Continuing on her hunt, Rayne takes out several more targets, but during the chaos, a voice over the PA system announces a security breach in the science lab, letting loose something the Nazis have been experimenting on called Damites. On her way to the science lab through the basement, Rayne experiences what's escaped, as the creatures seemingly take over the human bodies all around her. As their numbers grow too overwhelming, Rayne is forced to flee, spotting a photograph of Jürgen Wolf and recognizing his face as she flees. While dealing with the Damite outbreak, Rayne spots several targets on her list, dealing with them as well, including Dr. Bathory Mengele, better known as the Butcheress. She also comes face to face with Kommando, a masked infantry colonel who she crosses off her list despite his squad tactics. She soon comes across Major P. Eckstein, who reveals that the Damites weren't their creation, they only woke them while searching for Beliar's skull. However, the Butcheress's attempts to control them have obviously gone awry. After his speech, Eckstein is also crossed off the list. Using his own decapitated head, Rayne then tricks the Butcheress into letting her into the Inner Sanctum to meet face to face. The Butcheress claims to be a descendant of Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, claiming that she and BloodRayne have a lust for killing in common. To display this, she releases a trapdoor, feeding one of her unwitting soldiers to the Damites while explaining how they take control of their victims, drenched in a layer of sick satisfaction. As the Butcheress threatens to unleash the Damites upon America, BloodRayne cuts the conversation short. A fight then ensues, after which Rayne kicks Dr. Bathory Mengele into the pit of Damites. She then ignites an incinerator, killing the Damites, and seemingly the Butcheress, in the process. Her true fate, however, remains to be seen. Regardless, Rayne jumps into the pit of charred Damites and continues on her mission down into the mines, running into more and more powerful Damite opposition. After blasting her way through a blocked tunnel, she finds Kommando once again, or at least what remains of him, resurrected by a Damite inhabiting his corpse. She kills him, again, and continues on her way. She soon discovers the relic the entire operation was created to locate, Beliar's crystal skull. As she looks closely, Rayne notices that the skull is actually holding what she thinks is the real relic, one of Beliar's eyes. She grabs it, and much like the rib, it moves on its own and attempts to join with her, entering her own skull. As she recovers, BloodRayne realizes that she now has advanced vision, thanks to her inheriting Beliar's abilities. With their operation failed, the Nazis then attempt to destroy everything with explosives. Rayne beats them to the punch and escapes, detonating the blast behind her as she jumps out of the mines. On her way out of the collapsing facility, BloodRayne runs into the massive man-slash-machine hybrid known as Mauler, who fills her in on more of Beliar's history. He reveals that Beliar was the original ruler of Hell, until Mephisto fell from heaven and usurped it. When Mephisto couldn't kill Beliar, however, he was forced to rip him into 1,000 pieces. He then states that the most powerful relic, Beliar's black seething heart, is about to be unearthed by Wolf in Castle Gstaad. Rayne then takes out the massive general and soon spots Jurgen Wolf boarding a U-boat near a dock. She sneaks aboard another one, which takes her to Germany. There, she finds a message from the Brimstone Society awaiting her, instructing her to find her next target list at the GGG headquarters. Rayne follows the instructions, terminating a Nazi officer who holds the list, in a pretty spectacular fashion, and subsequently obtaining it. This leads her to the Castle Gstaad mentioned earlier, which happens to be a place the vampire race has called home for centuries. That is, until the Germans kick them out. However, the vampires they're up against are an ancient breed which have evolved in isolation to become the perfect killers. BloodRayne is informed that Wolf already has Beliar's teeth, ribs, a hand, and an eye, and she's tasked with stopping him from retrieving the Black Heart, which is hidden somewhere within the castle, to prevent the reawakening of the ancient devil. Rayne proceeds to fight her way into the castle, taking out numerous targets on her new list along the way. Inside, she finds attacking feral vampires, Nazi armored mechs, and most shockingly, Mints, now seemingly working for Wolf. Rayne confronts her one-time mentor, but Mints doesn't give her any answers, instead simply insulting her before attacking. The pair then battle, culminating with Rayne kicking Mints off of a cliff. However, Mints jumps back up to grab onto a wall like a spider, only for it to collapse anyway, leaving her to fall to her apparent demise. Continuing into the castle, Rayne comes across an unusually intelligent group of feral vampires calling themselves Hedrox, who unknowingly help her eliminate one of her targets. She later speaks with Hedrox, learning that he's seeking the relics for himself in order to become immortal. Hedrox states that he interrogated the owner of the castle, Count Voiku, by eating his head, learning that the Count held Beliar's Black Heart in his crown. However, even after obtaining the heart, Hedrox has been unable to absorb it. Noticing the relic within Rayne, he decides to eat her head to learn how she was able to use it. She predictably refuses this, prompting a battle between the two. During the fight, Hedrox runs off, and Rayne gives chase. However, she's soon interrupted by Wolf and his officers, including the formerly conjoined doppelganger twins, Simon and Sigmund Krieger, who she swiftly eliminates in a 2-for-1 crossoff. Suddenly, somebody drops a ladder down for Rayne to escape her arena, and she's shocked to learn that the person who helped her was yet again, surviving Mints. Mints finally reveals that she's been working as a double agent since the last time Rayne saw her, and has been working as her informant during her current mission, providing her with the target lists. To prove her true loyalty, Mints gives Rayne a couple Nazi officer nameplates to cross off her list. She then explains that in his current state, Wolf is nearly invincible, so they must stop him from retrieving the heart at any cost. Rayne reveals that Hedrox already has the heart, so the pair head off together once again to find the vampire. However, their reunion is cut short, yet again, when a gate drops down and separates them. Jurgen Wolf then arrives and tears out Mintz's heart, finally killing her for good. At least for now. Wolf then taunts Rayne from beyond the gate, telling her that Hedrox is waiting for them in the cathedral, before leaving. Rayne is able to break through the gate, and she rushes over to Mintz's body, swearing that she'll finally get vengeance by taking down Wolf. Meanwhile, Jurgen Wolf reaches the cathedral, where he demands that Hedrox hand over the heart. Rayne then joins the party, and Hedrox pulls out the heart. It suddenly unleashes its power, destroying Hedrox and resurrecting Beliar. The reborn devil then recognizes his other pieces inside of both Wolf and Rayne, and he proceeds to attempt to retrieve them. Rayne fights Beliar, and using both her brains, as well as her brawn, finally defeats the ancient being. In the wake of the battle, only Beliar's heart remains. Wolf arrives to retrieve it, leading to a final battle between BloodRayne and himself. Taking out all of her rage, Rayne finally crosses the final name off of her list, avenging Mince's death with a final slice of her blades, decapitating Jurgen Wolf. After a final salute to her fallen adversaries, Rayne approaches the heart, noticing it turning gray as it stops beating. She then proceeds to simply kick the useless relic down a sewer grate. As she walks towards whatever future awaits, the Brimstone Society warn her that they've learned of her father's location, and he must be stopped. Shortly after, BloodRayne finally locates and confronts her long-lost father, Kagan, in the Brimstone's blood library, searching for something. He coldly dismisses her, not remembering which woman he murdered was her mother. While Rayne points out that Kagan is dressed in Nazi regalia, he states that he's merely using them to learn how to create his own army, which he's currently well on his way to accomplishing. Kagan then discovers what he's looking for, the Vesper Shard. He then shows her a bloodied and beaten Brimstone Society member, who Rayne recognizes as Sir Tremaine. Kagan chastises Tremaine for stealing away yet another one of his progeny and teaching it to kill its own kind. In his final breaths, Tremaine warns Rayne to run, but Kagan claims that the professor had been lying to her all along, planning to use the Vesper Shard to eliminate all vampires, including half-breeds like Rayne. Tremaine then pulls out a detonator and presses it, triggering a massive explosion that destroys the library. Rayne is able to escape the blast just in time, and gazes upon the fiery wreckage. While her own personal mission is seemingly completed, it's really only just begun. While Rayne believes Kagan to be dead, she promises to return the favor by eliminating all that remains of his lineage. Meanwhile, the Brimstone Society has more missions of their own for Agent BloodRayne. At some point, she's sent to the Kinesis Labs in Stockholm, Sweden, where she fights a particularly vengeful demon, who claims that he watched Rayne kill his mother. Just as she goes to eliminate him, the demon warns her that the Brimstone Society is not who they seem. She then feeds on the creature's blood, but it suddenly transforms into its true form, that of a human child. Rayne drops the boy, mortified to have just fed from a human, and in his last breath, the boy claims that the Society is what turned him into the beast that she just fought. Later, back at Brimstone Manor, Rayne clarifies to the Society that her allegiance is strong, but still confirms with one of them that their mission to take out supernatural threats to humans is intact. The member simply tells her not to worry about it, before testing both her and the Society's allegiance with her next assignment. Rayne is then shown a secret room within the manor, containing all of the various artifacts and relics the Brimstone Society has gathered over the years. Among them is a sash containing the blood of the vampires in the Papadakis clan, which will allow Rayne to pass as a true vampire in order to infiltrate the clan's secret island in Greece. Her mission once she gets there is to kill the Papadakis' prince before he can sire a child. Rayne heads to Greece to find the island, avoiding all of the water around her, as it burns vampire kind upon contact. There, she locates the Temple of Deimos and fights its three-headed guardian until it flees. She then finds a ferryman to take her to the secret cove of Santorini Island, but the trip doesn't go as planned. During the voyage, Rayne is attacked by vampires, who end up throwing her out into the sea. Luckily, despite the burning, she's able to fight off her attackers, as well as feeding one to a giant squid. When she reaches the shore, she finds a camp filled with tents. Inside one of them, a vampire accosts her, revealed to be the prince. He claims that he's cursed to stay upon the island until he reproduces. Others then arrive and they notice that Rayne is a dhampir, causing them to turn on her immediately. After a long and explosive battle, the only two left alive are Rayne and the prince. With a kiss, she gives him a death befitting of a prince before decapitating him with her blades. 3 days later, Rayne returns to Brimstone Manor, where the Society celebrates her job well done. Part of this celebration is a ritual involving drinking the pure part of blood, which again causes Rayne to question the Society's true goals and intentions. She heads outside to think, and comes to terms with the fact that while she'll continue working with the Brimstone Society for the tools and information they can provide, she can no longer trust anyone. In the year 1940, Agent BloodRayne is attacked by 2 Lycans in London. She easily disposes of them, but one claims that their master demands extinction of all supernatural populations to create a new world. Rayne reports this event to the Brimstone Society, who confirm that Lycan attacks have been ramping up over the past month. A member then reveals that Rogers Wilbury, a former Brimstone researcher, had once tried to cure lycanthropy by studying a live werewolf. Unfortunately, it got free and bit Wilbury's son, infecting him with the infliction. As we saw earlier in this video, the Society was forced to execute the boy before he turned, and Rogers swore his revenge before going underground. The Society then sends Rayne to Lykunovisk, Russia, which is the birthplace of the Lycan race, where Wilbury seems to be commanding a Lycan army with the help of a werewolf king, known as a Lycan Rex. The Society provides her with a Lycan antidote that she can administer with her fangs, and sends her off to find Wilbury and the Lycan Rex. Unbeknownst to them, however, Wilbury is planning his own strike, sending a pack of werewolves towards the Brimstone Manor. When Rayne arrives in Lykunovisk, she immediately discovers a young boy named Michaelis, who has just been bitten by a werewolf. She sacrifices some of her antidote to stop him from turning, and in return, the boy leads her to where the monsters live. Meanwhile, the Lycan pack arrive at the Brimstone Manor in London and begin slaughtering members of the Society, forcing the survivors to hide out in a safe room while awaiting Agent BloodRayne's mission. With Michaelis' help, Rayne finds the Lycan's nest and begins taking them out one by one. Soon, Rogers Wilbury arrives to interrupt the fight, and Rayne demands that he turn over the Lycan Rex that he's been using to control the werewolves. Wilbury then reveals that there is no Lycan Rex. In fact, he killed all of them years ago, learning how to turn himself into one in the process. Wilbury then evolves into a massive Lycan Rex before attacking Rayne. The fight is filled with blood, blades, and a lot of mockery from Wilbury. Rayne's trademark rage takes over, and she carves out the Rex's eyes before finally putting an end to him, eliminating the Lycan threat. Rayne then returns to Brimstone Manor, where the attacking Lycans have since disbanded thanks to their leader being taken out. The Society gives Rayne their thanks, and she hands over the chemical solution that Wilbury developed to transform himself into the Lycan Rex. As she leaves, she warns them to be careful with it, as the world already has more than enough villains to deal with. It's at this point we fast forward 50 or so years in Rayne's story and into the new millennium. At some point during this period, Rayne stares up at the stars in a windowsill of the Brimstone Manor, remembering her conversation with Mintz decades prior about their everlasting friendship. Suddenly, she's interrupted by Michaelis, the same boy she once rescued from lycanthropy, now grown into an old man. Michaelis brings forth a young girl who claims to be looking for Rayne. While he can't quite understand the girl, Michaelis believes that she's speaking Tibetan. Rayne immediately recognizes the girl as another incarnation of her long-lost friend and mentor, Mintz. The reunited friends then share an embrace, while Michaelis smiles on. At some point, Agent BloodRayne is sent alongside a Brimstone Society Special Ops team to Toledo, Ohio, to combat a reported zombie plague wiping out the city. When they arrive, they find the city, renamed Unholy Toledo by its residents, now completely overrun by zombies, mere hours after the initial outbreak. Rayne slices through the zombies before finding the source of the plague, an ancient voodoo priestess named Marasa. Rayne immediately recognizes her as the same priestess who summoned the Queen of the Underworld in Morton, Louisiana decades prior, during her very first mission for the Brimstone Society. Marasa explains that she summoned another creature who promised to make her young again. This creature then bursts from the ground, and Rayne is shocked to learn that it's not only the child of the Queen of the Underworld, but Beliar as well, making it the Princess of Darkness. Things go from bad to worse to even worse when Marasa is suddenly impaled by a familiar blade. BloodRayne is then shocked to find herself face to face with Dark Rayne, a white-haired version of our hero, covered in black markings. While Rayne is confused as to how this doppelganger appeared before her, Dark Rayne simply tells her that she's there to save her, before BloodRayne is knocked out by the Princess of Darkness. When she awakens, Rayne finds herself in a perfectly normal Toledo, with no zombies or giant beasts in sight. Things return to normal, and nobody has any recollection of what happened or even how Rayne wound up in Ohio. Lord Michaelis theorizes that the entire ordeal was simply a lucid dream, or perhaps some kind of metaphysical manifestation of an alternate reality. Whatever the case, Rayne visits the Toledo hospital to find Marasa, the voodoo priestess, being pronounced dead. Sometime later, Rayne discusses an upcoming mission with a fellow Brimstone agent named Severin. However, during their discussion, Rayne is suddenly struck with a repressed memory of herself being held captive and experimented on by a familiar Nazi woman. For some reason, Rayne is drawn to the Chakase Castle in Slovakia, and she immediately heads there alone. Hoping to recover the lost pieces of her memory, and to find the person who took them, Rayne arrives at the castle, which is still adorned with Nazi flags. She's suddenly attacked by honest-to-goodness Nazi zombies, and she fights through them to enter the castle. Inside, Rayne finds a freshly dead woman, before she finds her cause of death, the shockingly surviving Butcheress. She reveals to Rayne that not only did the Damites in the pit she was thrown into refuse to attack her, but they protected her from the incinerator's flames. The Butcheress then reveals that Rayne was actually abducted and taken to that very castle in the year 1930, before she was used as a test subject for Damite larvae being implanted into humans to resuscitate them. Rayne's powerful half-vampire immune system killed most of the larvae, but the remaining ones remained in her brain, blocking out the memories. The death of the Damite Queen of the Underworld allowed her soldiers to come back as zombies, as well as Rayne's memories over time. The Butcheress then impales Rayne and has her tossed into the courtyard with the Blue Girl, while she declares her intention of taking down Kagan and retrieving the Vesper Shard for herself. In the courtyard, Rayne comes face to face with a massive, spider-like creature surrounded by a horde of Nazi zombies. When it slams down one of its legs on BloodRayne, a dark hand claws its way out of the rubble. Dark Rayne then emerges, awakened once again, and the alter ego begins to fight the zombie opposition. Dark Rayne quickly notices another warrior on the battlefield, a blue-skinned vampire named Feral, who has apparently been laying a trap of her own beneath the castle. Though neither of them exactly trusts one another, Feral reveals that she's gone underground and found the castle's gas lines. With the dead swarming around them, she and Dark Rayne work together just long enough to ignite the fuel below. As the Butcheress lounges in her bath of blood above, she catches the smell of gas a second too late. The entire castle then erupts in a massive explosion, engulfing the Nazi compound in flame. In the wake of the explosion, Rayne regains herself outside the ruins, staring at the inferno and trying to piece together what just happened. With her missing memories finally restored, and the Butcheress's undead stronghold reduced to rubble, the mission appears complete. Even so, Rayne can't help but wonder whether the Butcheress is truly dead this time. Given her history, she's not about to count on it. Around this time, Rayne is awakened one day by a Brimstone Society member with some urgent news. Lord Bowels has been kidnapped and taken to an abandoned munitions facility. Agent BloodRayne is sent on a rescue mission to the facility, and while she parachutes in from a plane, she notes that the sudden rise in supernatural activity might be indicative of something larger coming. Regardless, she makes a rough landing inside of the facility and immediately finds her target, Lord Bowels, strapped into some kind of machine with various tubes implanted into him. Unfortunately, as Rayne tries to remove Bowels from the machine, he doesn't survive the ordeal, whispering one word as he dies: Shroud. An ancient vampire named Slez then arrives, smelling Kagan's blood on Rayne. The beast claims that someone named Xerx removed part of the Lord's brain before it takes over his lifeless body, spawning a new creature from it. Rayne is then forced to fight this beast with her former friend's face, but she's flushed out of the facility before its conclusion. The man Slez mentioned, Xerx Mephistopheles, then arrives alongside his associate, Daryl Zarensky. Zarensky tells Xerx that he has finished his new laboratory within his mansion, and the pair head there to continue their mission, raising the cult of Kagan to power. Sometime later, on Halloween night, Rayne stops at a convenience store, which is coincidentally held up by a familiar figure from her past, Kommando, somehow revived once again. She takes him down, unmasking him to reveal a young punk, who states that his father purchased the armor at a German estate sale. She leaves him alive, but the monster she fought in the facility follows her scent, bursting through a drainage vent in the back of the store. Spotting it, Rayne simply tosses in a grenade, which destroys the entire convenience store in one blast. She then steps into a limousine driven by Severin, en route to Zarensky's mansion. The pair then pull up to the mansion, where Rayne attends Zarensky's extravagant Halloween party. As she provides a distraction with her jaw-dropping attire, Severin covertly searches the mansion's rooms. Rayne soon meets Daryl Zarensky, who predictably lays the charm on mighty thick after seeing her dress. Severin calls Rayne on her earpiece, and they meet to discuss in private, where Severin reveals that he has learned Zarensky is another child of Kagan, making their last interaction a bit awkward. Severin further states that Zarensky's staff are wearing a sigil denoting the cult of Kagan, leading the pair to believe that Daryl must be their Grand Wizard. BloodRayne is then tasked with getting behind a locked door, which Severin believes leads to the information that they need. He then hands Rayne her twin blades, while warning her to be a little cautious this time. She immediately disregards this advice and puts her blades to use, taking out Zarensky's guards while investigating the mansion. She quickly finds evidence that the cult of Kagan is going multinational, before finding a portrait of her father, which reminds her of the night she watched him die in the explosion. After making her way through the courtyard and the mansion's rooftop, Rayne finds Zarensky's prized possession, a pair of guns called the Carpathian Dragons. Rayne takes the weapons, which draw from their host's blood to create projectiles that are lethal even to vampires. Eventually, Severin finds everything he can and leaves BloodRayne to confront her half-brother with no pretense left between them. The pair meet amidst the corpses of the rich and powerful guests, but Rayne simply expresses her desire to eliminate all of the children of Kagan before the fight moves outside. Despite Daryl's ability to transform into a bat, Rayne takes Zarensky out, crossing off another name on her new list of half-siblings. Suddenly, due to a failsafe in case something were to ever happen to Zarensky, the entire estate starts to self-destruct. Luckily, Severin has located a helicopter, and he soon flies over to Rayne. She fills him in on what she's learned. She's found her family tree and learned that the entire Kagan cult is converging right there in that city. While Severin notes that Brimstone isn't happy, Rayne looks forward to getting the chance to take out the rest of her kin all at once. Meanwhile, Xerx Mephistopheles works in the lab that Zarensky built for him. He's joined by a female vampire, revealed to be his half-sister, Ephemera. Both, as it turns out, are children of Kagan, and Ephemera shares the news of their brother, Zarensky's, death with Xerx. He shrugs it off, showing her something he's been working on, an offspring of Slez, tied up for use as an eternal source of blood in preparation for the upcoming long winter. Unfortunately, Ephemera states that it tastes horrible. Elsewhere, Severin and Rayne discuss Rayne's findings inside of a bar. The Kagan cult hierarchy that she found shows all of the top positions filled with his offspring, of which there are many. Suddenly, Severin has to leave, and a cop car coincidentally crashes through the bar's window as thugs begin to attack. Rayne fights through them to escape the bar, hearing from Severin that there's heavy activity at a meatpacking plant called Ray's Meats. She goes there to investigate, finding a new form of opposition: identical, masked dhampir assassins known as Kestrels. They lead her on a chase, with Rayne eventually taking one out in the city streets, learning that they're leading the bad guys in rounding up civilians like sheep. Rayne heads to Union Station, where Severin states that Kestrels are corralling the citizens. They continue to run, detonating explosives in the station, forcing Rayne to fight more goons amidst the wreckage before taking out another Kestrel. The chase then leads to Club Strages and up into a clock tower, where Rayne finds not a Kestrel, but instead her half-sister Ephemera. The half-siblings then make their acquaintance, leading to a quick battle before Ephemera scurries away as the clock tower crumbles, nevertheless impressed with Rayne's abilities. Finding herself among the wreckage down in the sewers, Rayne isn't given much time to recuperate as the Kestrels then arrive, leading her to chase them deeper into the tunnels to find where the civilians are being taken. Severin notes that she's currently walking towards an old water treatment facility. As BloodRayne approaches the water treatment facility, she has no idea what awaits her there. An entire squad of bombers, instituted by Kagan himself in the image of the kamikaze pilots of World War II. One of the Kestrels downloads orders into their brains, and they await her signal to attack. However, one of the bombers begins to question if Kagan's ambitions are worth sacrificing his own life, and once Rayne arrives and begins slaughtering his brethren, he's simply captivated by her beauty. At that moment, he decides to throw away his orders and refuses to fight. The Kestrel disregards this and pushes him into the fray, however, forcing Rayne to pull his grenade's pin for him. As it explodes, the bomber's last moments are watching Rayne eliminate his Kestrel commander. While he knows that he's on his way to hell, he appreciates getting to see an angel on his way. After dealing with the Kestrel in the water treatment plant, Severin calls to inform Rayne that the cult minions on the streets have completely given up their cover and are causing mass chaos. He predicts that if they don't stop them quickly, the entire world will be sure that vampires are real by morning. Rayne fights her way through the sewer tunnels to find Slez in her new hideout, who smells Kagan's blood on her once again. This leads to a battle between the two, with Rayne learning that she can defeat the ancient vampire by destroying her heart. After fighting off her minions and pulling her heart down with her harpoon chain, Slez finally falls dead, allowing Rayne to continue on. Meanwhile, Ephemera meets with another child of Kagan, the mysterious blue-skinned Feral. Ephemera informs her sister of Slez's death, but the pair determine that nothing will stop the plans they have for the next day. Feral then states that Zerx will be conducting the final test of the Shroud the next day as well. Rayne continues through the subway, and Ephemera appears before her, asking her sister if she recognizes her. Rayne admits that she does, revealing that she saved Severin from her 8 years prior. Ephemera then takes her leave, but invites Rayne to see what they have planned the next day for herself. Rayne then calls Severin, who recounts a story about his past relationship with Ephemera, including when he found out her secret vampire identity. One day, he returned home to Mara to find Kagan was there with the Kestrels. The ancient vampire forced his daughter to unleash her true form, lest he kill Severin. So she did, before leaving with her father. Following the reverse underground railroad, Rayne emerges outside into Old Chemical Row, where she finds that Dawn has arrived. Though she's only half vampire, Rayne sticks to the shadows to avoid the sunlight's effects to reach the Wetworks. Inside, she meets another new foe, the Foreman. Rayne is forced to take out these massive, sledgehammer-wielding vampires as she shuts down the facility's equipment. As she fights her way through, Zerx and Feral conduct their final test of the Shroud, revealing the invention's purpose. While the sun is out, Zerx releases a massive brute vampire, which predictably vaporizes in the light. However, Zerx then activates the Shroud, clouding the sky with a red haze. When another brood is released, it survives, mauling some cultists with full strength. Zerx is thrilled to see their dream of vampires surviving in the daylight imagined, and Feral confirms that their tower can produce enough shroud coverage for the entire city. Severin quickly notices the vampires walking around in broad daylight and calls to warn Rayne. She immediately realizes that this must be the Shroud she's been hearing so much about, and vows to stop the oncoming vampire apocalypse it will likely bring. Rayne soon finds the captives being loaded into a massive meat grinder, to extract an enormous amount of blood, which is then being infused with various chemicals and pumped into the atmosphere through the tower to create the shroud. Severin determines Rayne must go to the nearby tower to shut it down and eliminate the shroud. After fighting more foremen and shutting off a few of the air pumps, Rayne runs into Farrell, who tries to stop her from taking out the rest. Rayne, resourceful as ever, destroys the rest of the shroud pumps on the tower anyway. In the wake of the destruction, however, Rayne gets buried in some rubble, out of sight of her adversaries. Farrell is then joined by the true mastermind behind the entire operation, the ancient vampire scourge, Kagan, badly burned, but still alive. Ephemera then arrives, and Farrell realizes that her sister never told their father about the red-headed dhampir menace, hoping that Rayne would lead to Farrell's downfall to put herself in their father's favor. Turns out, her plan worked. Failing to protect the tower leads to Kagan having no need for Farrell anymore, and he allows Ephemera to impale her sister and toss her off the tower. Kagan then decides that his time has come, and he instructs Ephemera to flood the sky with shroud so that he can finally create his vampire kingdom. Sometime later, Severin helps Rayne out of the rubble, and he's surprised at her calm reaction to Kagan's survival. Rayne is instead excited to have the ability to put him down herself. Unfortunately, the pair soon notice more patches of shroud popping up in the sky, until the entire city is soon covered in the bloody clouds. Vampires of all kinds then begin to emerge, feeding on the various passersby in the city. Kagan stands atop a large tower with his daughter, Ephemera, as they watch buildings fall as the age of man comes to an end. Severin and Rayne reconvene and realize that while she took out one tower, they failed to stop the shroud itself. Even worse, Severin can't get a hold of the Brimstone Society, meaning that the pair are on their own to prevent the end of the world. Rayne then fights her way back towards Kagan's tower, facing Ephemera's strongest vampires on her way. She makes her way through the zoo, facing a new insect-like threat inside. There, she finds Ephemera herself, and the pair have another battle. After cleverly hampering her half-sister's ability to use her shadow-shifting abilities, Rayne finally emerges victorious, telling Ephemera to rest in hell as she falls to the ground. Rayne then reunites with Severin, who spots a surviving Farrell nearby, leading a group of rebel cultists in her own vengeful attack on Kagan. Rayne covertly catches a ride on one of the helicopters, taking her up towards her father's tower. Meanwhile, on the tower, Zerk shows Kagan their grand work. 4 portable units constructed from the Vesper Shard and the Sun Gun, creating powerful anti-vampire weapons. Kagan's forces then test the weapons on Farrell's attacking army, to great success. The helicopters are brought down, and Rayne is sent crashing through one of the tower's windows. Inside, she's met face to face with Zerx, who introduces himself as the Grand Inquisitor, before running off. Rayne then destroys the portable solar cannons as Zerx escapes. Meanwhile, Farrell's vampire soldiers continue their assault against the cult of Kagan, and Rayne uses the distraction to continue through the tower. After fighting a brute in the server room, Rayne meets Kagan's Trower elites, the very first vampires that he turned back in the old country. Rayne finally brings an end to the old vampires. She then runs into something called an Unraveler, a massive, spider-like vampire that forces Rayne to use all of her abilities in both traversal and combat. After taking it down, Rayne runs into Farrell once again, but as they emerge atop the tower, Farrell is quickly shot with the Sun Gun by Zerx, donning a biomech suit. She vaporizes in the light beam, leaving BloodRayne as his final target. Zerx then aims all of the sunlight beams towards Rayne, and an epic battle then ensues. As Rayne dodges the light beams that stand to weaken her, she attacks the biomech's weak spots to finally bring it down. Zerx's corpse then falls through a glass ceiling, crashing back down into the tower's executive suite. Rayne follows him down and enters the throne room, finally reuniting with her father, Kagan. He notes that she's been far more trouble than he ever expected, before revealing that he's implanted the Vesper Shard into his own skin. Rayne simply states that it won't help him, before engaging her father in their final battle. After a grueling fight, Rayne finally takes down Kagan. For her mother, for her city, and most importantly, for herself. Rayne uses her blades to take off Kagan's head, finally killing the vampire lord for good. For real this time. In the wake of the battle, Severin arrives and asks Rayne how it feels to have killed the entire Kagan bloodline, save for herself, of course. She simply states that she'd feel better if everything went back to normal after Kagan died. But Severin believes that there are still people out there who need help and their leadership. Rayne agrees, planning to start a group to take out the vampires roaming the street, especially now that they have the sun gun. The Brimstone Society, meanwhile, seemingly declares open war with all vampire kind to prevent another overlord from taking Kagan's place. Severin anticipates that this will include he and Rayne, as Brimstone begins to move their operations underground. Though Rayne finally decapitated Kagan and ended his reign, the nightmare he helped unleash didn't die with him. The shroud still hangs over the city, and vampires continue to roam the streets unchecked. True to their word, Rayne and Severin use the sun gun to begin clearing them out, while the Brimstone Society mobilizes in full force to contain the crisis. Over time, between the Society's resources and Rayne's relentless overwork, the shroud is eventually dispersed and order is restored, though the scars of Kagan's uprising leave a permanent mark on the supernatural underworld. Rayne, meanwhile, returns to the Society's ranks, though not out of loyalty. As she's already come to realize, Brimstone's tools and intelligence are too valuable to walk away from, even if the people running it can no longer be trusted. So, sometime later, when two Brimstone operatives disappear chasing rumors of a serpent-like monster, Agent BloodRayne is sent to investigate, only to find something far stranger waiting for her. Instead of finding serpents, Rayne finds two giant demons instead. After swiftly taking them out, she's surprised to hear another woman complimenting her blades. The woman, carrying blades of her own, introduces herself as Tiger Wraith, and claims to not be looking for trouble. Regardless, Rayne decides that she's found some anyway, and attacks her. Tiger Wraith reveals that Rayne's efforts are useless, as she can't be killed. She's already dead. As the pair continue to spar, Tiger Wraith explains that her restless spirit reanimated her body, and brought her back to the cemetery that they're currently in. Their battle is soon interrupted as the ground shakes. Suddenly, a massive serpent emerges from the ground and consumes Rayne. Tiger Wraith reveals her hatred of snakes and slices the large creature in half, bringing it down for good. Suddenly, Rayne emerges from the serpent's corpse, but Tiger Wraith quickly notices that something's off. Dark Rayne then emerges, claiming to finally be awakened after her captors falsely imprisoned her during the Mage Wars, and she's soon joined by several familiar vampires emerging from the ground, including the two surviving Kestrels, and led by none other than her own surviving half-sister, Ephemera. Dark Rayne fights the opposition, taking them out before returning to her normal form of BloodRayne. Tiger Wraith helps Rayne recover, and she decides to make sure the Brimstone Society has their eye on her. Now knowing the fate of the Brimstone agents, BloodRayne returns home for a nice, hot shower. At some point, the Brimstone Society sends Rayne to investigate reports of a giant creature roaming the sewers. With a history of sewer monsters causing issues, Rayne decides to investigate immediately. Down in the sewers, she finds a mutated creature, and while she tries to attack, the creature explains that he knew Lord Bowels, who was experimented on by Sleds. With the fight stopped, the mutant reveals that he used to be a priest, and a friend of Lord Bowels, before they were both abducted and transformed by Sleds. While Rayne lets him live, as soon as she climbs back to the surface, he's eaten by a sewer-dwelling alligator. Later, BloodRayne goes on another mission, this time to retrieve a pair of nunchaku that once belonged to Kagan. As she uses them against some pursuers, however, it opens a portal to hell, unleashing a demon that wipes out all of her attackers before she seals it back within the nunchucks. Returning to the city, Rayne is met once again by a familiar vampire, her half-sister Ephemera. A fight then ensues, but Rayne immediately notices that something is off with Ephemera's fighting style. After her sister takes her blades, Rayne recognizes a weakness and slices the woman in half, spotting bio-armor indicating that the Ephemera she just killed was simply a clone of the original. Rayne is then trapped by black cables, and a surviving foreman from the wetworks reveals himself as her captor. He further shows Rayne his own army of clones, explaining his plan to create his own blood shield to protect himself from daylight. Luckily, the building he's been renting to conduct these experiments belongs to a shell corporation belonging to the Brimstone Society, and they happen to plant failsafes inside all of their properties. Rayne then triggers the failsafe, escaping as the high-rise building explodes, bringing an end to yet another supernatural threat. Sometime later, a traveling circus draws the Brimstone Society's attention by advertising a familiar demonic relic, the Bowels of Beliar. It also draws the attention of a dhampir thief, who Rayne catches trying to steal the relic before she can. The pair fight over the Bowels, but are interrupted by the ringmaster of the sideshow, who realizes that all of this supernatural attention must mean his relic is the real deal. Seeing the immense power that they could hold, the ringmaster smashes open the Bowels container and grabs them. As he attempts to absorb them, however, he realizes that they're useless cow intestines. The dhampirs then slaughter the man before Rayne beheads her temporary partner, exclaiming that you can never trust a dhampir. At some later point, Agent BloodRayne finally gets approved to take a vacation. She travels to San Francisco, California, but packs her blades just in case. As it turns out, that case appears very quickly, as she turns down an alley to find a vampire feeding on a human, somehow in broad daylight. Rayne attacks, but the vampire claims to have been helping her, using advanced technology to survive the sunlight. As the fight escalates, Rayne suddenly finds herself transported to another location. The vampire reveals that they're now in New Guinea. But more important than where they were transported is when they were transported, hundreds of years in the past. Rayne then realizes that she's dealing with a cybernetic, time-traveling vampire from the future, who claims that he went back in time to prevent the man that he was feeding on from killing Rayne. Their conversation is interrupted by a familiar enemy, the Legion of Monsters, calling themselves Hedrox. Rayne is then able to use the futuristic vampire's time-traveling device to return home just before Hedrox attacks, leaving the other vampire in the past. Back in present time, Rayne decides to return to Brimstone HQ, electing to take a cruise the next time she goes on vacation, hoping the water will prevent any vampire interference. Sometime later, Rayne finds herself under psychic assault from a powerful vampire empath named Garrick, better known as the Plague of Dreams. Unlike the monster she's used to fighting, Garrick can reach her through sleep itself, invading her nightmares and tormenting her night after night. Back at Brimstone Manor, Rayne is calmed by the Society, and finally agrees to speak openly about her previous encounters with Garrick. She first recounts a mission in New York 4 months prior, when Brimstone sent her into the Empire State Building after tracing a supernatural entity there. Inside, Rayne found the guards reduced to mindless husks and uncovered a series of grotesque psychic creatures wiring the building with explosives. Before she could stop the operation, she came face to face with Garrick himself, a hybrid of vampire and empath with enough telepathic power to tear through her thoughts the instant he touched her mind. In that moment, he learned who she was, saw that she was Kagan's daughter, and realized that she had already killed several of her siblings. Rayne, in turn, caught a glimpse of his own past before Garrick severed his link to the creatures and disappeared, leaving Brimstone to study one of the lifeless teledrones left behind. Lord Michaelis then arrives, and Rayne describes her second encounter with Garrick in Seoul, South Korea, 1 month later. There, Brimstone tracked him to a train, only for Garrick to hijack it, rig each segment with explosives, and hold its passengers hostage. During the ordeal, he murdered 2 Brimstone lords, framed North Korean radicals for the attack, and openly declared his intention to become a vampire messiah who would reclaim the world from humanity. With both attacks in mind, Brimstone pieces together his true plan. Garrick intends to provoke human conflict on a global scale, then use the chaos to launch a coordinated vampire uprising. Forced to finally admit what she saw in New York, Rayne reveals to Michaelis that Garrick is not just another enemy, but her half-brother, the last son of Kagan. Unable to shake that revelation, Rayne travels to one of Kagan's hidden castles in England to confirm whether the memories she saw were real or not. There, she walks through the ruins of Garrick's childhood and learns just how brutally Kagan raised him. Bred to be Kagan's greatest heir, Garrick spent his youth abused, isolated, and forced to use his psychic gifts on human victims, while the rest of Kagan's progeny despised him for being a half-breed. During her search, Rayne encounters an ancient immortal servant known as Myriad, a creature bound to Kagan's bloodline who confirms Garrick's history and recounts the night he finally escaped his father's control, which was almost foiled by ephemera. At the same time, the Brimstone Society begins showing cracks of its own. Lord Michaelis confronts Lord Cyril after learning that Brimstone's higher ranks already knew Garrick was Rayne's brother, and deliberately kept that information from her. Even worse, he accuses them of also hiding the existence of a cure that could have allowed Rayne to live a normal life. Cyril all but confirms that Rayne's feelings towards Garrick have been treated as a test of her loyalty. Even so, once Garrick's location is uncovered somewhere in the Middle East, Brimstone prepares for an all-out war, introducing Rayne to a new triumvirate, spirit-bound super soldiers designed to counter Garrick's abilities. What Brimstone doesn't realize is that Myriad has already passed their battle plans along to Garrick. Brimstone then launches a full assault on Garrick's desert stronghold, but the attack goes wrong almost immediately. Garrick's forces are waiting for them, and the ambush kills a huge number of Brimstone troops. Only the Triumvirate's possessed forms keep the offensive from collapsing altogether. Even then, when Brimstone diverts its telepaths away from shielding Rayne in order to preserve the Triumvirate, Garrick briefly gets into her head and unleashes Dark Rayne, who turns against her own side. Luckily, BloodRayne is able to return and eventually pushes deeper into the compound for a final confrontation, while outside, Brimstone quietly reveals how expendable she truly is. If Garrick escapes, they're prepared to bomb the entire compound, Rayne included, to keep their secrets buried. Rayne and Garrick then battle one-on-one, but throughout the fight, Garrick mocks her with the fact that Brimstone has been lying to her, manipulating her, and will sacrifice her without hesitation. Rayne refuses to believe him and continues her attack, even after Garrick warns her that the Society is about to bring the entire structure down around them. When the bombardment begins, Garrick has every opportunity to leave her behind, but instead saves his sister's life and forces her clear of the blast. Rayne survives, wounded, furious, and more conflicted than ever about the brother that she came there to kill. After she leaves, Garrick emerges from the rubble, where he's discovered by Lord Cyril. Cyril surprisingly offers Garrick a chance to be human, but he simply tells the Brimstone Lord to go to hell. Back at Brimstone Manor, the last of Rayne's trust in the Society finally shatters. She finds Michaelis gravely beaten after he looked too deeply into Brimstone's hidden dealings, and she reveals that the Society tried to kill her as well, and that Garrick was the one who saved her. Sometime after the events with Garrick, Rayne receives a call from an old friend, a vampire named Valerio, who needs her help in Mexico City. Despite the current drama going on with the Brimstone Society, Rayne decides to cash in on a favor she owes him and head south. Meanwhile, somewhere in a dingy basement nearby, a young American woman wakes up chained to a wall. Standing over her is a man with a camera, recording the whole ordeal. He rambles about being a filmmaker first and a recruiter second, telling the terrified woman that vampires are real and that she's about to be turned into one. In less than 10 minutes, he promises, she'll be an entirely new woman. A vampire then lunges from the shadows and bites her, turning her right there on camera. The man, whom we'll come to know as the director, couldn't be more thrilled to have finally gotten his masterpiece on film. When Rayne arrives in Mexico City, she's greeted on a rooftop by Valerio, who wastes no time starting with flattery, while Rayne simply tells him that he's late. She fills him in on her recent past, the evil brother, the fight to the death, and the Brimstone Society trying to blow her up. Valerio, in turn, tells her why she's there, Something big is happening in his city. Something bad enough to have caught the attention of the American media. Women have been disappearing from the streets of Mexico City in alarming numbers, sometimes 2 or 3 a night, and it's been going on for months. The vampires on the street have a name for it: Rojo Sangre Transcurso, the Red Blood Run. Valerio was born in Mexico City almost 500 years prior, when it was still Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. His origin is quite unique. When European vampires stowed away on Cortez's ships and arrived in the New World, they attempted to turn an Aztec local in hopes of gaining an ally on the inside. Valerio was their victim, but it didn't work out too well for them. He killed both of the vampires who turned him almost immediately, making him the first American vampire ever. As for the Red Blood Run itself, Valerio explains that it's a vampire slave trade that has been functioning in one form or another ever since vampires came to Central America. The operation kidnaps humans and turns them into vampires for slave labor, since making your own vampires is obviously a safer venture than trying to capture them. Worse, they've made a habit of targeting women, leaving them less likely to fight back against their male captors. Rayne notes that there must be hundreds of missing people, but Valerio corrects her. It's closer to thousands. When Rayne asks why Valerio hasn't shut it down himself, he reveals that he's single-handedly put an end to the run more times than he can count. But this time, things are different. It's under new management. With that, the pair get to work scouring Mexico City's underworld for answers. Valerio kicks down a wall to reveal a nest of vampires, including one named Cebrian, who makes his living in organized crime. Valerio mocks him, and when Cebrian spits in his face and calls him a traitor, Rayne steps in to handle the interrogation herself. While Cebrian insists that the run hasn't been operated by vampires in years, and that it's now run by humans, specifically Americans, Rayne isn't gentle about extracting information. She threatens some improvised surgery with her blades, and Cebrian eventually gives up a name: the Director, some American kid who's been in charge of the kidnapping side of the operation. With that lead in hand, Rayne and Valerio track down the Director to a bar, where the aspiring filmmaker is loudly bragging about his work to anyone who will listen. He rants about how Hollywood has disrespected him, how his footage of real vampires turning humans into bloodsuckers will make him famous, and how much he dislikes a certain hack German filmmaker who spliced video game clips into his movie. Rayne and Valerio crash through the bar's entrance, and the Director suddenly loses his confidence. After some persuasive dart throwing, courtesy of Rayne, the Director spills everything. The newly turned vampires are being handed off to a bald man called Trainer, who meets him at an abandoned warehouse downtown at exactly 1:30 a.m., arrives by limo, pays in cash, and communicates only through handwritten cards with the date of their next meeting. The Director reveals that he's supposed to meet the Trainer tomorrow night. Rayne spares the Director's life, telling him that he just got himself a very hot date for tomorrow night. Meanwhile, deep beneath a skyscraper in Mexico City, the newly turned vampire women float unconscious in suspended tanks, row after row. The bald Trainer walks among them with a hooded figure, who speaks in reverent tones about their true gods and their plan to offer the world its first taste of immortality. The hooded figure then asks to be called by his name, and it's a name we know all too well: Jürgen Wolf. The same Jürgen Wolf Rayne decapitated decades ago has seemingly returned from the dead, wearing a Brimstone Society amulet around his neck and speaking of the merciful deities who lifted him from 50 years in the deepest pits of hell and made him a new man. We then flash back to 487 years prior, in Tenochtitlan at the height of the Aztec Empire. The Aztec rulers sit on their thrones as the crowd chants for their gods, but their evening entertainment takes a dark turn when a newly turned vampire, the man who will become Valerio, stumbles before them, terrified and confused. The rulers are shocked. A child of the night, here in the New World, is supposed to be impossible. The newly turned Valerio has no idea what he's become. All he knows is that he's just drank someone else's blood, and he's horrified by it. The Aztec rulers, posing as gods, then see an opportunity. They tell the frightened young man that he's been cursed, but that they, as his gods and creators, have the power to mold his soul and reclaim his humanity. All he has to do is give himself over to them and become their servant. Desperate, confused, and with nowhere else to turn, Valerio pledges his cursed soul to the divine hands of the true gods. Back in the present, Rayne and Valerio have tracked the trainer to a parking garage beneath one of Mexico City's tallest skyscrapers, and they proceed to feed on him. With the trainer out of the way, Rayne questions why slave runners would operate out of the business epicenter of Mexico City. Valerio reasons that hiding in plain sight is actually smarter than previous incarnations of the run, noting the 30-story building, prime real estate location, and strangely, not a single guard in sight. The pair enter the building and ride an elevator up, with Rayne noting that villains always hide out on the top floor. Meanwhile, General Wolf receives a report from the trainer, who is apparently still alive, having survived Rayne's feeding on him thanks to a serum that made him immortal. Wolf's concern is that the same formula coursing through the trainer's veins also breaks down vampiric DNA, meaning when Rayne fed on him, it should have started stripping away her powers. Wolf then orders preparations for the arrival of one of their lords and saviors. Back at the Brimstone Society, things are currently falling apart. Old Michaelis plays hide-and-seek with a young girl, the reincarnated Mince. Their sweet moment is interrupted by Lord Quinlan, who demands the child be turned over for testing. Michaelis refuses, insisting that Rayne explicitly left Mince in his care, but the Brimstone Lords overpower him. Lord Quinlan then orders the child be taken to the research laboratory and the old man be placed in solitary confinement. On the rooftop of the skyscraper, the elevator doors open and Rayne and Valerio are immediately ambushed by a massive, masked brute named El Pulverizador. The ensuing fight is brutal, with El Pulverizador tossing Rayne around and threatening to snap her arms off like twigs. Rayne then pulls out the 12-slug exploding heart technique and unloads into him, but it barely slows him down. After a prolonged and gruesome rooftop battle, Rayne and Valerio finally manage to hurl the massive hitman off the building. But Rayne's relief is short-lived. Something is very wrong with her body. She feels sick, like she's on fire from the inside. Valerio then catches her as she collapses, and when she asks what's happening, he simply tells her that she's very sick. When she argues that vampires don't get sick, he reveals the truth. What she has doesn't kill her, it changes her. He then tells her to prepare herself for what comes next, because he knows that she'll never forgive him. However, he claims that he had no choice. They have his soul. Rayne then passes out, and Valerio delivers her unconscious body directly to Jurgen Wolf, completing yet another betrayal against Rayne. Sometime later, Rayne wakes up in chains inside Wolf's facility, surrounded by suspension tanks filled with the unconscious vampires. Wolf stands over her, cutting her hand with a knife and marveling at the blood that falls. He explains that the trainer's blood carried an enzyme that breaks apart the base pairings in vampiric DNA. It took approximately 30 minutes since Rayne fed on the trainer for the enzyme to render her fully human, during which they collected blood specimens from her before all vampiric properties disappeared entirely. Wolf then lays out his grand plan. His operation has made extraordinary breakthroughs with vampiric DNA, isolating the desirable traits, like immortality, from the curses, like sunlight aversion and bloodlust. What's left after subtracting those components is the one thing that every human being has ever wished for: pure immortality. Rayne, now human and powerless, fires back with her trademark sarcasm, calling Wolf out of his Nazi-loving mind. Wolf, clearly stung by the label, snaps at her to never call him that again. The villain continues his monologue, explaining that all vampires will eventually be eradicated using the Cure, which the Brimstone Society has apparently had for years, and the only vampires left will be those under their control, created using Rayne's blood to enforce the new laws of this utopia. Wolf then reminds her that none of this would have been possible without her so-called friend, Valerio. Rayne is devastated, begging Valerio to help her, but he he can barely look at her. He tells her that she couldn't possibly understand. The true gods have owned his very soul for almost 500 years. Wolf then decides that it's time Rayne meet one of his masters. Lord Cyril then enters the room, and Rayne immediately recognizes him from the Brimstone Society. However, this isn't the Lord Cyril that she knew. He confesses that he is not, in fact, the leader of the Brimstone Society. He and his brothers have taken control of Brimstone to serve their own needs, and they're about to make the world their eternal playground. When Rayne asks who, or what, he really is, the entity inside Cyril reveals that it and its siblings were among the first sentient beings ever created in the universe, predating the current god by an immeasurable amount of time. They were born of a god 7 generations and 6 universes ago, created to love their creator just as all beings are. But when their god refused to follow the divine timeline, specifically failing to create beings of free will, a messenger filled them with a new emotion: hatred. They helped drag their own beloved creator from her throne, and for their rebellion, they were banished to a plane of existence where they could not move, speak, or see, only think and feel the rage that had been implanted in them. They were forgotten and eternities passed, but eventually their prison broke apart, and they escaped into a universe that didn't create them, meaning the current god has absolutely no power over them. They are, as the entity gleefully declares, the first truly autonomous beings to ever live, the, quote, true gods. Meanwhile, at the Brimstone Society, Michaelis is freed from his cell by a young Brimstone member, who reveals that the High Council, specifically Lords Addison and Quinlan, are murdering Brimstone lords left and right. A full-blown coup is seemingly underway, and Michaelis realizes the conspiracy runs deeper than anyone imagined. The Society has been sabotaged from within. With Lord Cyril missing and Rayne having sent a code red distress signal before vanishing from the grid, Michaelis gathers what supplies he can, including the last sample of the Lycan Rex serum, and prepares to evacuate every loyal Brimstone Lord. Before they leave, however, the young man reminds him that they can't leave without her, meaning Mintz. Back in Mexico City, Rayne listens to the entity's story and then delivers the good news and bad news. The good news? She's impressed. In all of her years of hearing villainous rants, this one has officially reinvented the wheel. The bad news? She reveals that while they took her guns and her blades, they forgot to take her earpiece, the one that feeds directly back to the Brimstone Society and to Michaelis. Turns out, they've had their own contingency plan in place ever since the Society tried to kill her alongside her brother in the desert, and right now, that plan is in full swing. She tells Wolf that she hopes he didn't leave anything important inside of Brimstone Manor. At that moment, Michaelis, the young Brimstone member, and Mintz escape the manor just as it erupts in a massive explosion, destroying the ancient headquarters and everything the traitorous lords had built within it. Rayne then reveals one more surprise. She holds up her hand. Wolf had cut it earlier, but now there's no blood or wound. The cure for vampirism that the Brimstone Society had been hoarding? Michaelis snuck into one of Wolf's secret chambers, got his hands on the cure, and had the loyal lab boys develop a vaccination against it. Rayne was actually inoculated before she ever set foot in Mexico. The whole transformation was a ruse. She's still a dhampir. With that, Rayne breaks free of her chains and goes straight for Wolf. The old Nazi charges at her, and the two fight hand to hand. Rayne tells him that she's glad he came back, because she's been dreaming about killing him again for 70 years. She then overpowers him, biting his neck before escaping through a window and crashing down into the streets below. Outside, Valerio is waiting with her weapons. When Rayne sees him, she slugs him across the face. He tells her that he deserved it, and she implores that he deserves a lot more. He explains that when the true gods gave him an order, he must carry it out, but Rayne demands the truth. Valerio tells her that everything the entity said was true, whether or not she wants to believe it. The true gods first came to Earth when the Aztec Empire was at its height, posed as gods, and performed miracles until the entire empire knelt before them. The The first generation of the Brimstone Society, who came from Spain, managed to seal them away, but Valerio, who had foolishly given them his soul, was eventually forced to free them. Rayne tells him that if what he says is true, she'll find a way to stop them and free him from their control. But if it's another lie, she promises to instead see him dead. Days later, Rayne reunites with Michaelis and young Mintz in a safe location. The Brimstone Society, as they knew it, is finished. The true gods have control of every Brimstone annex across the globe. Luckily, Rayne has a lead. Valerio claims that the first step to understanding these ancient beings is a text called the Book of the Fifth Sun. After they find that, they'll head east. Rayne has friends in Japan who might be able to help. As Little Mintz asks if they'll win, Rayne gives the girl a confident smile and promises Auntie Rayne is about to show these losers who's boss. Shortly after the fall of the Brimstone Society, Rayne and what's left of the loyal members find themselves in Prague, Czech Republic, searching for the Book of the Fifth Sun. After following a paper trail of Brimstone holding companies and safe houses across Marrakesh, Rabat, and Torino, the group finally tracked the book to a sealed tower in the city with no doors or windows, covered in heavy-duty mystical protective signs. Rayne scouts the building from rooftops while communicating with her ragtag team back on the street. Michaelis, a young spell hacker named Beal, and Little Mintz, all crammed into a van. Without access to the Brimstone mainframe, Beal's ability to crack the tower's defenses is severely limited. When Mintz suggests bringing in Valerio for help, Rayne shuts it down immediately. After what he did in Mexico City, she's not about to trust him again. She even questions whether the entire mission is another setup, wondering if the Book of the Fifth Sun even exists, or if the paper trail was planted for them to find. Despite her doubts, Rayne raises a valid question to Michaelis. If the book is the one thing that could be used to imprison the true gods, then why wouldn't they just destroy it? Michaelis theorizes that perhaps they hope to study it to learn how they were originally sealed away, to prevent it from ever happening again. With time running out and the triumvirate potentially closing in, Rayne decides to stop debating and start acting. She scales the tower, and while Beal notes that the roof's protective signs are weaker than the walls, he can't send anyone up there to help crack them. So, Rayne does what she does best. She finds her own way in. That way turns out to be a trap, though. The moment she breaches the roof, she triggers an elemental tripwire, summoning a pair of salamanders, massive, writhing fire spirits that immediately attack. She crashes through the roof and into the building below, where she finds herself in what appears to be an ancient library, and she's far from alone. Waiting for her are a group of gas mask-wearing, sword-wielding monks that Rayne describes as fetish gear-wearing ninja monks. She fights through them, noting an emblem nearby that resembles the Brimstone Society's insignia, but with key differences. When she relays this to Michaelis, he immediately recognizes it: black sulfur. Michaelis explains that black sulfur was always considered a ghost story within the society, a supposed shadow cell entrusted with certain secret knowledge. Beal insists that it's just a legend told to scare young members, but Michaelis connects the dots. The reason the true gods didn't destroy the Book of the Fifth Sun is because black sulfur has been guarding it. The protective symbols on the tower's walls aren't just keeping people out, they're keeping black sulfur in. The monks can't leave with the book, and they can't speak the incantations that it contains. Before Rayne can even process this, the tower begins to shake violently. A massive figure then bursts through the library wall. A golem, an enormous creature of steel and stone, animated by sorcery. Her firearms are useless against them, so she switches to her blades, but even her trusty steel barely scratches the golem. As it pummels her through walls and across the crumbling tower, Beal finally earns his keep. He asks Rayne if there's any writing on the creature's head, and when she confirms that it's Hebrew, he identifies the word as emet, meaning truth. He instructs her to hack out the first letter, which would change the word to met, meaning dead. Rayne climbs the massive automaton and drives her blade into its forehead, carving out the first letter. The golem immediately collapses, bringing most of the tower down with it in the process. Rayne barely survives the fall, crashing through the floors and landing in the rubble as the entire structure caves in around her. Battered and buried, Rayne pulls herself from the wreckage, fearing that the Book of the Fifth Sun may have been destroyed in the collapse. However, one of the surviving Black Sulphur monks emerges from the debris, clutching a red, ornately decorated tome. Without a word, he helps her up before handing the book to Rayne. With the Book of the Fifth Sun finally in hand, Rayne contacts Michaelis, who can hear police sirens approaching. She tells him that she's fine and, more importantly, she has what they came for. She then gives the order, contact the others, and meet at the rendezvous point. They leave for Tokyo by midnight. 10 years prior, at the headquarters of Red Sun Rising, the eastern arm of the Brimstone Society, we find a man named Hichiro coordinating a stealth operation with his field commander, Chinatsu, to raid a division of the Brimstone Society itself. Hichiro insists that the targets are innocent men and that lethal force is strictly prohibited, punishable by permanent expulsion from their organization. His forces use tranquilizer darts and superior combat skills to subdue the Society members, including a small group of trained warriors guarding a library. Among his soldiers is a young fighter named Daisuke, who notices the absence of a woman named Ayano, who Hichiro notes is still working on her temper issues. The operation is completed in a record 15 minutes with 0 casualties, and Hichiro's forces successfully capture the entire division. Back in present day, Rayne and Severin arrive in Tokyo to find the Red Sun Rising headquarters reduced to smoldering ash. Severin determines that the destruction happened within the last 12 hours, fast enough to prevent any of the Brimstone Lords from even sending a distress signal. Rayne's aura sense picks up no signs of life, but she notes that the absence of bodies doesn't necessarily mean everyone was killed. The Lords could have been taken hostage. Regardless, she suspects that whoever did this wanted to get her attention, since Red Sun Rising was destroyed the very night before she and Severin were supposed to rendezvous with them to help clean up Tokyo's vampire Yakuza problem. Rayne calls it into Michaelis back at headquarters, while Severin jokes about wanting a raise and a vacation. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Tokyo, we meet Lord Niburu, a vampire lord sporting a golden claw-like gauntlet, who oversees a brutal training session with his soldiers. Niburu grows furious at one of his subordinates, Michi, for failing to stop Hichiro and his forces. He reveals that Hichiro not only dismantled the Red Sun Rising, but also pilfered every sacred text and artifact in its possession, taking the Brimstone Lords with him as well. Niburu is particularly enraged at Michi's inability to defeat Hichiro's warriors in combat, especially Ayano, whom Michi describes as a nearly unstoppable fighter he once watched single-handedly take down over 100 opponents. Niburu dismisses this, refusing to hear another word about her so-called samurai immortal, and gives Michi 24 hours to locate Hichiro's forces, threatening him with torture at the hands of his shrikes, should he fail. Back with our heroes, Rayne and Severin ride a motorcycle through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo. Rayne sends Severin off to run recon, while she heads into a nightclub to confront the Yakuza directly. Inside, after dealing with an unwanted admirer, Rayne approaches a Yakuza boss and his men, slicing off the boss's fingers when he doesn't cooperate, mockingly citing the Yakuza tradition of cutting off fingers for dishonor. She demands to know what they know about the destruction of Red Sun Rising, and the Yakuza boss insists that they had nothing to do with it, pointing out that they would never purposely start a war with the Brimstone Society. He begins to mention a name, Hicha, before he's suddenly killed by throwing stars from a group of armored warriors who burst into the club. Rayne finds herself surrounded by a squad of female warriors led by a woman in traditional samurai-style armor, Ayano. Rayne guesses that they're the ones responsible for destroying the Red Sun and asks why they did it, but Ayano refuses to respond. Rayne makes a sarcastic quip about it being no answers for me day before the fight finally breaks out. The ensuing brawl is intense. Rayne challenges Ayano to drop her sword and fight hand-to-hand, and the two trade blows in a wild melee across the nightclub. Despite Rayne's best efforts, Ayano's warriors join in and overwhelm her through sheer numbers. Severin arrives, guns drawn, demanding to know what's going on, only to find himself surrounded and outmatched. He immediately surrenders. Back with Naburu, one of his subordinates brings him news. Michi has found Ayano and a group of Hichiro's men gathered at a Yakuza-owned property, apparently trying to capture a woman. When Naburu sees a photo of the woman, he recognizes something, noting that he once knew her father, calling Kagan a wretched soul. He orders a force assembled under his personal leadership, planning to strike as soon as Michi reports coordinates, and wonders aloud what his old apprentice, Hichiro, is up to. Sometime later, Rayne wakes up alone in a traditional Japanese room, confused and calling out for Severin or the crazy ninja woman. Before she can escape, she steps out onto a balcony overlooking a sprawling compound of red-roofed buildings nestled against a mountainside. A voice behind her then greets her, introducing himself as Hichiro, and welcoming her to what he calls the last hope for the survival of the Brimstone Society. Rayne isn't exactly thrilled about her new accommodations and threatens to go through Hichiro if he doesn't give her answers. The old man simply returns her weapons as a show of good faith and assures her that Severin is safe amongst his people, though he finds him very strange. Rayne immediately demands to know how she ended up there, and when Hichiro reveals he sent Ayano to retrieve her, she grabs the old man by the throat, accusing him of sending a leather-clad psychopath to kidnap her and waking up in his bedroom. Hichiro protests that it was just imperative they speak, as the world is in danger. When Rayne asks why she should believe him, he reveals two things. First, he once faced her father Kagan in a battle as a Brimstone Society agent, and bears the scars to prove it. And second, the enemy they currently face is so powerful that even Kagan once fled rather than fight him. He then punctuates this by flipping Rayne onto the floor, demonstrating that he's not nearly as helpless as he appears. Impressed, and slightly bruised, Rayne agrees to hear him out. Hichiro then drops the bombshell. He was the one who orchestrated the destruction of Red Sun Rising. Before Rayne can react, he begs her to hear the full story first. He presents her with a katana and explains the threat they face. Within the blade resides the soul of Akane the Unconquerable, the most tyrannical vampire lord in Eastern history, who terrorized the region until he was defeated by the first generation of Japanese Brimstone lords 200 years ago. It was Akane's threat that originally prompted the Brimstone Society to establish annexes across the globe, the first of which was Red Sun Rising, where Hichiro served as a young man. Facing certain defeat at the hands of Red Sun Rising, Akane ordered a trusted mage to bond his soul into his two most prized katanas, rendering the blades indestructible through enchantments. Now, anyone who holds one of the blades too long will be possessed by Akane's infernal soul. This is exactly what happened to Hichiro's former master, Naburu, who now wields one of the two swords. Naburu was nearly finished murdering the entire society and completing his transformation into Akane the Unconquerable by acquiring the second sword, which would have reunited Akane's soul and erased any of the remaining consciousness of the once noble Naburu. In order to prevent this, Hichiro had no choice but to dismantle Red Sun Rising first and remove the second sword from its possession. Hichiro and his people have already developed a protective enchantment against the blade's dark influence. When Rayne touches the sword, she experiences Akane's violent thoughts screaming at her to kill, but is able to release it safely. Hichiro then offers to show Rayne the full story firsthand. Using the sword as a conduit, he takes Rayne's hand and channels a vision of the past. 52 years prior, a young Hichiro accompanied his master Naburu to confront Kagan over the first sword of Akane's soul. Naburu defended his young apprentice against Kagan's mockery, noting that the boy's abilities had tripled under his tutelage and that his skill with the katana rivaled his own. Kagan dismissed this, pointing out that Hichiro is a human and could never match a vampire's strength. But Naburu countered that strength alone never wins a battle. In the ensuing fight, Naburu ordered Hichiro to retrieve the sword while he handled Kagan. The young apprentice managed to wound Kagan, slashing him and sending him tumbling off of a cliff. While Kagan obviously survived, the victory allowed them to seize the first blade and return to the society. However, that victory came at a terrible cost. Upon holding the blade, Naburu sensed it speaking to him, remarking on its masterful craftsmanship. Over time, Akane's whispers corrupted him. The sword fed Noboru's ego, telling him that the other members of the society didn't respect him and were jealous of his power. Young Hichiro overheard the society elders expressing concern that Noboru hadn't turned over the sword, but Noboru dismissed their worries, insisting that the blade made him stronger and better able to serve the society. As Akane's influence grew, however, Noboru became overly confident and reckless, eventually snapping and murdering the High Council of Red Sun Rising when they attempted to hold him accountable for his defiance. Young Hichiro witnessed the massacre and was forced to act. He escaped, going underground, and over the years built a new secret organization dedicated to one day stopping his fallen master. Back in the present, Hichiro lays out his proposal to Rayne. His old master cannot be saved, only stopped, and he grows stronger with each passing year. Should Noboru ever gain possession of the second sword, the casualties could be in the thousands. Hichiro believes that together, Rayne and Ayano will be able to best his former master in combat. Hichiro further points out that for all of the Brimstone Society's good intentions, their vanity and blind adherence to outdated tradition has left them wide open to corruption from within. There are no checks, no balances, and no protection from their most dangerous enemies, themselves. He cites the Lycan Rex incident of 1940, when Lord Rogers Wilbury nearly destroyed Brimstone's central headquarters, and asks Rayne to imagine what would happen if someone hijacked the society from the higher echelons and used its vast resources for evil. The potential for utter chaos spans to a worldwide level. Rayne, recognizing the truth in his warnings, especially given her own history of distrust of the society, responds simply, checks and balances. Two separate organizations, one kept in secret to ensure the other never loses control of itself. Hichiro confirms, his people are the New Red Sun, and their purpose is no longer to serve the Brimstone Society, but to protect it. He's not asking Rayne to be a simple agent. He's asking her to join his family and help perform the duty that she knows is so desperately called for. Together, they will be more than business associates. They'll be friends, family, partners. Rayne agrees. Meanwhile, Ayano enlists Severin's help in capturing a traitor. She reveals that Chinatsu, Hichiro's most trusted field commander, defected to Noboru's side several weeks ago after handling the second sword of Akane's soul before proper mystical protection was developed. Chinatsu was the first of Hichiro's people to encounter the blade during a recon mission, and the sword's influence corrupted it, driving him to Noboru in pursuit of its power. Before explaining further, Ayano decides to test Severin first, attacking him without warning. After he instinctively uses his shadow-based abilities to defend himself, Ayano reveals that she's read his Brimstone file. He's not a dhampir, but he possesses the same shadow-based abilities as Rayne's deceased half-sister, Ephemera. She needed to confirm this, as his control over shadows is the reason she needs his help. Severin, understandably shaken, points out what would have happened if he didn't have those abilities. Ayano simply acknowledges that he'd be dead. The plan works, and Ayano confronts Chinatsu, who rants about how the sword of Akane's soul could make a righteous man an unstoppable warrior for good, revealing that his plan was to use Noboru in order to get the blade for himself. Severin then knocks him out from behind, and Ayano scolds him for not following orders, which Severin just shrugs off. With Chinatsu subdued, the pair capture Michi, who immediately starts spilling everything he knows about Noboru's strategy. Hichiro orders preparations for immediate battle, revealing that they deliberately allowed Noboru's forces to trail Ayano back to their location the previous night. If they must engage the enemy, he figures it's best to do so on familiar territory. When a worried Rayne asks how much time they have before Noboru arrives, Hichiro grimly tells her he's already here. Beneath Hichiro's compound, the captured Chinatsu is chained in a dungeon alongside Michi. Chinatsu warns that the sword calls out to him, and that he cannot be trusted near it. But Hichiro insists that if they can't find the courage to trust themselves, the battle is already lost. He orders Chinatsu's shackles removed and his sword returned, placing his faith in his old friend. Above, Rayne and Ayano fight side by side against the invading horde, developing a surprisingly effective partnership in the process. When Rayne asks about Noboru's elite guard, Ayano explains that they're trained killers whose pedigree traces back to the very dawn of the samurai arts. Rayne asks their stance on firearms, and after confirming that they consider guns to be tools of the barbarian, Rayne pulls out her pistols and opens fire, quoting the old Western adage, "Never bring a knife to a gunfight." Severin joins the fray as well, fighting alongside Hicharo's warriors against Noboru's seemingly endless forces. Meanwhile, Noboru himself carves through the defenders, slaughtering anyone between him and the second sword, declaring that he can feel its presence calling out to him. He eventually confronts Hicharu directly, who stands his ground with the cursed blade in hand, while telling Noboru that his disregard for human life has exceeded even that of the great Kagan, and that there is truly nothing left of his old master inside. Noboru offers to spare Hicharo's life if he hands over the sword, claiming that he's not a monster. Hicharu responds with a heartfelt apology. He's sorry Noboru lost his way. Sorry that he was forced to watch such a noble soul devolve into what now stands before him. And most importantly, sorry that tonight Noboru must die, so that others will no longer suffer his blind and unrighteous wrath. Their duel is fierce, but Noboru's power, enhanced by Akane's soul, proves too much for the elderly Hicharo. Just as Noboru is about to deliver a killing blow, Ayano intervenes, driving her blade into Noboru to protect her master. Noboru simply impales her with his own blade, mockingly calling her Samurai Immortal, before Hicharo seizes the opening. He grabs the other cursed sword and tosses it to Rayne, telling her to catch. When Rayne grasps the cursed blade, something unexpected happens. Instead of being possessed by Akane's evil soul, she's able to maintain control of her thoughts while channeling all of the sword's immense power to transform into Dark Rayne. Noboru is stunned, demanding to know how this is even possible. What follows is a brutal duel across the compound's rooftops under the moonlight. Dark Rayne, empowered by the cursed blade and ablaze with supernatural energy, engages Noboru one-on-one. She overwhelms the corrupted lord, proving faster and stronger than he ever anticipated. When Noboru taunts Rayne mid-fight, calling out her pride and overconfidence as her weaknesses, just like her father, it only fuels her to slice off his hands, finally separating him from his blade. A surviving Ayano then arrives to deliver the finishing blow, driving the katana through Noboru and telling him that the next time he attempts to kill a vampire, he should aim for the heart. Noboru then disintegrates, finally free from Akane's corruption, whispering, "I am free," as he fades away. In the aftermath, Rayne and Ayano share a moment on the ruined rooftop. Rayne thanks Ayano for having her back, and Ayano returns the sentiment. Rayne admits that she's still a bit annoyed at how Ayano welcomed her into the city, so Ayano promises to bake cookies next time. Rayne then asks how she was able to wield the sword without losing her mind, and Ayano reveals that Hicharo cast a spell on Rayne while she slept, an improved form of the incantation that protects both Ayano and Hicharo from the blade's dark influence. Hicharo's new spell allowed Rayne to tap into the sword's full power without succumbing to its darkness. Hicharo, as always, prepared for every eventuality, knowing that the battle might ultimately come to rest in Rayne's hands. Rayne jokes that she could use a man with skills like that, but their celebration is cut short when an alarm sounds. It's the Brimstone Society. Rayne triggered her emergency beacon when the fighting first started, before she knew Hicharo's people weren't a threat. Unfortunately, it's not something that can be cancelled once activated. The Society is on its way, and they'll want answers. Lots of them. Hicharo then makes a difficult decision. He orders Chinatsu to burn down the compound, ensuring that the Brimstone Society never learns of their secret organization's existence. As the flames engulf their home, Hicharo reassures his heartbroken apprentice that the allies they've gained are more than worth such a petty loss. Rayne asks if they've thought of a proper cover story for the Brimstone High Council, and Hicharo laughs, saying he has a few yarns ready to spin. And believe him, it's gonna take a good one to shake the High Council off their tails. They leave just as the Brimstone Society lords arrive, and the last thing we see is the flames reflected in Lord Cyril's eyes. It's here that the BloodRayne continuity came to a close on a cliffhanger in 2008. As mentioned in the intro, however, the amazing folks at WayForward Technologies gave us a new BloodRayne game back in 2011. BloodRayne Betrayal gives us a brand new story in a brand new universe, with brand new play and presentation style. But it pulls a lot of the same themes and events from its source material. So, as a final bonus, let's go over that game's story quickly too. At some point, the Brimstone Society intercepts news of a giant vampire gathering. Knowing that their soldiers are no match for a supernatural army, they call in Agent BloodRayne to lead the charge. As soon as she shows up, Rayne immediately starts taking down the opposition in great numbers on her way to the hidden underground castle where the meeting is to take place. Despite all of the supernatural forces thrown at her, Rayne finds the castle's entrance and leads the Brimstone soldiers there. Unfortunately, they're ambushed at the gates by the giant, mechanical crab puncher. Rayne destroys it, falling down a shaft to the caverns underground. There, she fights more primitive-looking monsters while seeking out the vampire meeting. A river of blood then takes her up into the castle, as a white raven begins to follow her, seemingly helping her along the way. Rayne then fights through the castle's various guards and mechanical defenses, including the Crab Puncher Mark II. The White Raven then arrives to help Rayne past a blocked path, just as the vampire lord Kagan arrives to chastise his soldiers for failing to stop Brimstone. The Raven then warns Rayne of her father's arrival, before his mutated soldiers interrupt the conversation. Rayne fights through them and carries on into the castle, eventually finding herself just above the room in which the meeting is occurring. Led by Kagan, the vampires celebrate the culmination of years of work, as the Lord announces their reign is about to begin. Suddenly, Kagan raises the castle, and it emerges from underground. Rayne falls through the ceiling, and Kagan thanks her for dropping in. When she defeats his soldiers, he blasts the floor beneath her, sending her down to fight the Crimson Demon, a giant mass of blood with an exposed heart. After she destroys the heart, a blast sends her falling. Suddenly, the White Raven transforms into a dashingly handsome white-haired man, who subsequently catches Rayne, saving her from the fall. He then turns back into the Raven and flies away before Rayne even has a chance to thank him. She then presses on, with the White Raven man eventually helping her acquire the Sun Gun. Using it to unlock various paths into the castle, Rayne runs into the White Raven man once again, who shockingly double-crosses her, allowing Brimstone Society members to lock her inside of the castle, as they turn on her as well. The Raven flies off, and suddenly Kagan arrives in his stead. The Vampire Lord immediately slaughters the Brimstone soldiers and engages in a battle with his daughter. While she puts up a good fight, he grows tired of it and knocks her out, determining that she's too weak to join his army. When Rayne awakens inside of a cell, the Raven appears and apologizes for his actions, believing he was doing the right thing by hunting all vampires, including her. Realizing Rayne is different, he transfers his power to transform into the Raven form into her, which he admits is a permanent decision. With this new power, Raven is able to avoid various obstacles to fly through the castle, even fighting flying enemies. Eventually, another rising tide of blood carries her back up into the castle, where she finds Kagan once again and confronts him. In typical fashion, the following fight isn't fair. Kagan summons the Zeta Gamma demon and fuses with it. Rayne is then forced to take down the Story's Tall demon by attacking his Krang-like exposed abdomen. When Rayne finally deals enough damage to Kagan, the demon comes crashing down. Unfortunately, Rayne quickly notices that it was a load-bearing demon, and the castle comes crashing down around her in a fiery blaze. Using all of her abilities, she fights through the final remnants of opposition as she escapes from the wreckage. Once she's at a safe distance, BloodRayne watches the castle as it explodes into a mushroom cloud. The head of Kagan's demon she just defeated then flies towards her. And with that, no matter what continuity you're following, the original games, Betrayal, or the comics, BloodRayne's story ends with her walking alone, unable to trust the Brimstone Society that once demanded her own loyalty. From a vengeful young dhampir hunting her father across 1930s Europe, to a one-woman army dismantling vampire cults in the modern era, to uncovering ancient gods pulling the strings behind the very organizations she served, Rayne's journey is one of the most sprawling and underappreciated stories in gaming. And while the original continuity ended on a cliffhanger back in 2008 that we're still waiting on, the fact that people are still asking me to cover this series over 15 years later says everything about the mark BloodRayne left. Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching this one. If you want to support these longer, more niche breakdowns, especially ones covering franchises the algorithm has probably never heard of or won't like because the main character dresses very provocatively, you can become a Patreon supporter or channel member with those links in the description. Just like these beautiful folks on screen right now who literally make it possible for me to do this and like survive in this crazy world. Also, please leave a like if this helped you out or you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more full story recaps, timelines, and deep dives into game worlds worth remembering, and let me know in the comments what series you want to see me cover next. Thanks again, everybody. This has been Suggestive Gaming, and now you're in the know.